Well, good morning, folks. It's good to have you here. We may have some folks trickling in who's still waiting for their coffee, but we need to begin. And I want to begin with a follow-up to what David Yarbrough said in his sermon this morning about missionaries. Missionaries are incredibly important people, and here's why. Think of your own spiritual ancestry or your religious heritage. You would not be a Christian if it weren't for a missionary somewhere in your past. Someone somewhere took the gospel to your ancestors, your families way back when. So missionaries are of vital importance. We don't think, though, of missionaries and engineers in the same sentence very often. And we're lucky enough today to have Randy Larson with us, who's going to tell us about how those two indeed come together. I first met Randy when he was a student at Whitworth in the 1990s. He remembers taking a class with me. I remember him being in the class, so we verified that fact. And he then went on to finish his engineering degree at Columbia University in New York. After that, he got involved with Engineering Ministries International and spent 7 years in Guatemala picking up Spanish, and then was assigned to Cairo, where he founded the EMI office in that city, working in Egypt and elsewhere in the area. So Randy has a lot of experience with EMI, and he's currently based in Ellensburg, where he is doing recruiting and support for other missionaries working with EMI. He's going to tell us about various aspects of his journey, and especially about EMI. Sue and I have had the privilege of supporting Randy partly over the years, and I know we will want to continue doing that. And I invite you please to listen carefully to what he's saying, to see if maybe this is something in your personal capacity you would like to do as well. So, Randy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Gordon.
We welcome also his wife, Tiffany.
She's going to keep track and make sure I don't. Thank you, Gordon. What Gordon didn't say is that Gordon came to visit me when I was in Cairo and stayed with me for a short time on one of his many travels. Yesterday, when my wife and I drove in, it feels like coming home to me. You know, when you get through all of the wheatlands and you see your first green trees, and then you know you're coming into Spokane. It just gives me that warm feeling inside that able to share a bit about what I have the privilege of doing with my work at Engineering Ministries International. So Spokane, and even while at Whitworth, I had a few opportunities to do mission trips, you know, even in middle school and high school and again in college. And those were good things. You know, they were good things for me. I got out, I got to see different experiences and cultures. And I think we helped build a pastor's home. And those were good things. But still, I knew the Lord was pursuing me in my heart personally, yet I was keeping him at arm's reach. And it felt good to, you know, go to church on Sundays. It felt good to go do a mission trip, but I knew God wanted more all of my life. He wanted me to commit myself to him. And I wasn't ready for that yet going into college. And one time, one of my good friends at Whitworth, Zeke Nelson, he said, I'm organizing a mission trip to Guatemala. And I really feel like the Lord wants you to be on that trip. And immediately I knew he was right, but I didn't want to go because I knew what I was my life, and I knew God was different. And if I went off to Guatemala, I knew God might do something crazy, and I didn't want him to do anything crazy with my life. Right? I was. And so I told my friend Zeke something real spiritual, like, well, I'll pray about it and let you know. And in my heart, I was saying, no way, God, I'm not letting you anywhere near that. Well, not too many years later, God brought me through a semester abroad study program where I was exposed to real poverty in Central. And in, I think, God's wonderful sense of humor, he ended up sending me as a missionary for 7 years to Guatemala a number of years later. So be careful if you ever tell God no, he's listening, and he does have a sense of humor for us. It was on that same study abroad program that I had the opportunity to spend some time in Nicaragua. I was just graduating as a civil engineer, and had a real interest in water and wastewater, and didn't know how that was going to work for a career. I wanted to do something in ministry. The Lord had really touched me. I think that engineering and mission could ever go together. Like maybe doctors can do that, right? Or maybe we can go and build a pastor's home, but I didn't know how engineering would have anything to do with ministry or God or mission. Never crossed my mind. Well, in Nicaragua, I had the opportunity for 2 weeks to serve with an organization there called Los Papitos. And there were a few social workers, and I would join with them while learning a little bit of Spanish. And we would go and search out poor families in rural areas who had disabled children, special needs. And so we would follow along, and they would ask families, is there anyone in your neighborhood with these needs? Is there anyone over here? And so I remember we would connect with a number of different families, all of them in heartbreaking conditions. But there was one situation where we had to crawl over some rubble of a ruined building. And when we got to the inside walls of this building that had no roof, there were a number of families living under tarps that were stretched, still standing. One of these families had a disabled little girl. And so we were invited into their tarp. And I remember there was one light bulb that was strung, just twisted together on wires, that was borrowed from some neighbor. It was covered with black soot. And that was so remarkable to me. And immediately I knew when you entered that tent, I was choking on this toxic air because the family had no wood, didn't have the capacity to go out using cooking fuel that was simply plastic trash. Was filled with this, and it had coated that light bulb. While the social workers connected with the mother and the family to offer whatever services they could. Job, a non-Spanish speaker, to hold this baby girl who was completely handicapped. She had been laying on a blanket on a piece of concrete at the back. And I remember as I held her, her stomach was bloated, her hair was orange and wiry. And she couldn't even focus. I mean, her mind wasn't there. But she could respond to my touch. And so I could just hold her and rock her. Well, as that day went by, and 3 weeks later, I found out that that little girl, who was actually 3 years old and should have been around, getting into all sorts of trouble, but she died of dysentery. And dysentery is a water-related illness that results in a very severe case of diarrhea. And she died from this in her weakened state. And it touched me profoundly. And I found out that at that time, more than 4,000 children die every day from water-related illness. Just children, every single. Thankfully. And I've lived in that tension. And that is one of the things that drives me now 21 years with Engineering Ministries International, because water and wastewater is one of the many things that we do get to bring to communities like this. And situation and being of immediate help. But if we could send one civil engineer in today, we don't have to send 10 doctors in later. And so at Engineering Ministries International, and Mike, we'll go ahead and start the first slide. At Engineering Ministries International, we are a group of engineers, architects, surveyors, construction managers who work in mission all around the world. So we're about to celebrate our 40th anniversary as a ministry, and we now have 11 offices around the world. We work in developing countries. We've worked in more than 115 countries, and we've worked on more than 1,600 projects. These are the planning and design of orphanages, hospitals, schools, churches, water systems, anything that will give us the inroads to the gospel and the love of Jesus, and that are serving the poor. So these are the two things that we look for in any project. And so we have about 160 missionaries now worldwide. And all of our missionaries are engaged in taking short-term trips. And so oftentimes our short-term mission model is critiqued, because it's kind of the paratrooper model where we drop in for a short time, we create a ruckus, and then we're out of there and we go back home and we feel good about ourselves. And there have been plenty of walls of pastors' homes that we've had to go in and rebuild because they were built by youth teams that come down short-term or whatever. And now those still hold a value, because I think God is more interested in what he's doing in us than necessarily through us, right? And so those experiences do create wonderful opportunities for changed hearts and exposure. But we really look for projects that are invited and invested in the local communities. So we are invited to come and join and serve a ministry that is long-standing in that community. Some of those are missionary-led projects. Some of those are local community projects. And so EMI, of the 160 almost staff that we have, almost half of those are from the countries where we are serving. Like we've got offices in the Middle East, in Uganda, Senegal, Cambodia, South Africa, and among other places. And so that's very much a part of what we are doing together. So we join with the local people in the planning and design of these projects. So I wanted to share with you today a little bit about 3 different projects, and then we'll have some time for question and answer. But at any time, I would love for you to interject or raise a hand, give me a question, and we'll stop there. So the first project I wanted to share about is very special to me. In August of 2019, shortly before COVID, I was able to travel to northern Iraq. And so with my experience of about 8 years in the Middle East, I was chosen to be a project leader on this project and to take a design team into the area of Kurdistan to work with an unreached people group. And so if you might have heard of the Yazidi people, they came into the news back in 2014, 2016, because they were really targeted by ISIS. So the Yazidis number in about 1 million people. They're very introverted, very exclusive community, and they're defined by their religion. They have a unique religion that is monotheistic, and it predates Christianity. And so it's very interesting, actually. They worship angels, and their principal angel is symbolized by a blue peacock, of all things. And so as we were going there to work with this unreached people group, we were told to not wear anything blue. Couldn't have worn blue jeans, couldn't have worn this shirt because it is a holy color, too holy to be worn every day on our clothes. So we had to learn a little bit about the people and where they've come from. But when ISIS came through that region, they targeted this people group because they were very different than Islam. And so ISIS went in deliberately to destroy that group, and they did. They went in and just devastated the few towns where these people lived. Many thousands of men were killed. The women were taken either to be domestic slaves or sex slaves. And the people were just devastated. But through this experience that they had, for the first time, there were reports of people coming to know Jesus. And I don't know how those first people came to know Jesus. Now we know there's about a dozen or up to 20 believers from this group that have just happened in recent years. And so the first project to help provide a group to establish a church community, just a body of believers, is sponsored by Samaritan's Purse. And so then Samaritan's Purse asked EMI to come in and help them do a design on 42 acres that would be a refugee community for the Yazidi people, to come and have a place to be able to take a step out of poverty so that eventually they could go back to their homeland when it was safe. And these pictures here show some of the Yazidi families. And our project provides a vocational school as well as a place to meet for those new believers, community center, education, housing, and agriculture, which is key to who these people are, where they've come from, and how they can continue in their being. The picture here on the far right shows a Yazidi woman meeting with at a refugee community where she's lived at that point the previous 5 years. This was a profound interaction that we had with her because our translator, this woman here in the middle, her name is Saipan, and she is of the Yazidi people, and she is one of the first believers from the Yazidi group. So, and she had a phenomenal testimony. So she was translating for us from this Yazidi woman who was living as a refugee. Yes, Gordon.
Why is she wearing blue?
That's a good question. That's a great question. Because she was Western educated. So she is one of the few who was able to get out and be exposed to that. Now she is even wearing blue jeans, even though we were given specific instructions not to. So maybe she knew more of how to do that in her own culture, but we went not wearing blue at all. That's a great question. I should have asked her that too. The woman on the left there was the mother who had lost her entire family during ISIS. And so she was in the process of trying to find, she knew her husband had been killed, at least one of her sons had been killed. And behind her was another room where one of her daughters had been rescued from Syria, where she had been held in a basement and just abused for 2 years straight. And for 2 years, she did not exit that basement. And she was not able to come out and greet us. She was so filled with shame and not able to even interact with anyone outside of her own mother. There were counselors involved at this refugee camp, but that's an example of one of the families that we wanted to be able to provide hope for and to be able to invite to the community that we designed. So here is most of our team, as we were designing there in that area. We were staying in Erbil, a city nearby, and we spent about a week and a half there in Kurdistan, trying to get the initial design up, connecting with the locals, understanding what they needed, in the home of a refugee, as well as their agricultural needs and all of this investigation. And then after that trip, we came home and spent the following 3 or 4 months finishing the design of that community. Well, it's been one of the success stories because through the time of COVID, they have been able to get this whole project built. And so in a moment, I'll show you a slide of the project that the video is about 2 months old. And then just last month, they had the grand opening. And right now, the last families are moving on site, which is really exciting. Greenhouses. We're talking families here of 8 to 12 people. And one greenhouse would have been enough to sustain a family like that. But they have enough room for 2 greenhouses so that the excess that they produce can be sold and the family can begin to save, to provide education for their children. And like I said, eventually move back to their homeland. And that was the idea, not that they would come here and live forever and be eternal refugees, but that they would come for a short time. They would be exposed to the love of Jesus through the local community and the believers that are there, taught things, new skills in the vocational school, and then able to move back home. So the greenhouse is also part of our design because in this area, it can also get quite cold. So in the wintertime, it snows. And they've got one growing season, much like Eastern Washington, like that. Well, with the addition of a greenhouse, and if they choose the right crops at the right time, they can get up to 3 growing seasons. And so this is really strategic to how they can get ahead in their lives and teaching them how to do that. And so this greenhouse was the very first one built that was used as an experiment to see what sorts of vegetables we could get to grow during that time. So in the last few years, they've built an entire refugee community based exactly on design that will have room for up to 75 to 100 families, and then including education, clinics, places for families to gather, and the vocational school. So let's bump over to the video. Petroleum, and so on the hillsides around us, we would see the stacks that were burning the methane off gassing from the production of petroleum in the area. So this region of Kurdistan is kind of known as their breadbasket, but a lot of petroleum comes out of there. It was all around us. Yeah. Yeah. So this site previously had been used for agriculture and had been filled with olive trees. And there was only one small home on there for the family that would care for that farm. And they had one well. And so we knew that there was water down below, but we had to revive that well and dig 2 additional wells to the depth of 600 feet to be able to provide enough water for all of the greenhouses. And so when this is up and going, this is going to be the greenest spot in that whole area, which you could see was very arid. And again, Samaritan's Purse was the one able to finance the wells and the construction of the facilities there. Yeah. One of the construction, yeah, well, just last month we had the grand opening. And so right now the last of the families are moving in. And that was a whole selection process as well, to find families that were capable of doing the agriculture and learning and even receptive to living in a new style of community. And so each family was vetted with those criteria. So how long did it take to build? Almost 3 years of construction. And again, that was complicated because of the region, and this was during COVID, supply chain issues. All of these wreaked havoc, all the more in places like Kurdistan. Yeah. The construction manager who worked with our team the last 3 years as EMI from our South Africa office actually was providing construction oversight. And so we had a small team of engineers that would travel regularly to the site and make sure it was all progressing according to plan. Well, one of the construction managers heard about this project and came seeking a job. And he was from a Muslim background. And he had an incredible testimony where, as a young man in his mid-20s, he was hit by a vehicle and paralyzed. And having already been married and a couple small children. Well, somewhere in the following years, he had a dream, a vision, where Christ appeared to him and literally said, "Get up and walk." And when he woke up from that vision, he was completely restored physically after years of being completely paralyzed. And this changed his life, of course, completely. And he put his faith in Christ, and he is very outspoken about his faith in Christ, even with all of the dangers that means coming from a Muslim background. And so he was one who has been working through that construction process with us. So just an example of the way that God is working in the Middle East right now. Let me move on to the second project I wanted to share a little bit about. Previous to going to Kurdistan, I helped lead a design team to, you might recognize this, you know where this might be? What's that? Close, right next door to El Salvador is Guatemala. You see a lot of the same, but it's even more common in Guatemala than it has been in El Salvador. Partly because of places like this. So this is close to the Neba, which really suffered through the civil war and genocide that happened through the 80s, at least in Guatemala. And this is, so we went to design a school. We had 200 to 300 children in 2 rented facilities in this small town. And this is a missionary project from a missionary based in Seattle, working with a Christian school that was already at work in this community. And so part of the reason why this project is so strategic is because young girls don't go to school here. That's just a privilege that is beyond the level that the poverty allows, really, and the culture. And so the purpose of this school, while it has boys and girls, was really to give the opportunity for young girls to be able to have an education, not just through 3rd grade and not just through 6th grade, but all the way through high school. Now they're constantly battling the pressures of the culture to be able to keep girls in school and not stay home to take care of younger brothers and sisters and not to get married when they're 12 and 13 and 14 years old. And And so this was during a ceremony, a welcoming ceremony that they gave to us. Well, the facilities that they were renting were extremely inadequate. Here you see a young class that is praising and singing before they start their school day. In one of the two facilities that they were renting for hundreds of children, this is the only bathroom. That was the men's bathroom, and the women's bathroom was like it on the other side. That's all that they had for the entire school. And so I helped lead this design team, and we spent, again, about 10 days in country designing a new facility on about 6 acres of land that was quite challenging. And so a lot of these projects that we get, they get discounted land. They're looking for a deal. The ministries don't have much money to spare. And so that was the case here. And so the ministry was able to actually buy 6 acres on a hillside. And that was one of the greatest design challenges, and why it was so important that we could go and provide a design that was safe and effective to be a school on a slope. And so we made sure that we could provide water filtration systems and sanitation on site that would really serve the entire community. And here's just one early preliminary rendering of the site. You don't get the magnitude of the slope here, but I'll show a couple other pictures in a moment. And so these are the classrooms, and it's so sloped that the lower level you walk in on that side, but on the upside, you're walking right into the second level. And so that was one of the ways that we could build on the slope. And in the middle of it, with large retaining walls, we could build a football pitch or a soccer field. And in this way, we were able to take a school that had been 200 to 300 children and allow it to grow up to 600 children because they already had more than 100 on the waiting list. And so it was drawing kids from even neighboring communities. So a really neat project, one that was closer to home. And as Gordon said, that I had lived about 7 years in Guatemala. And so it was really fun for me to be able to go back to Guatemala after I had been away more than a decade. Any questions about the school in Guatemala? They do have to pay, and it's very, very little. Well, okay. In our terms, it would be very, very little, but for many of the families, that's still a sacrifice because they have nothing. And so even they're able to pay what the family is producing, if it's a few chickens or whatever. But the same thing that our ministry has learned, if we give away something for free, it's not valued. And so unless there's some skin in the game, unless it costs something to the family, they won't value it as much. And that would increase the dropout rate. Yes.
Did you guys vastly improve that restroom?
Yes, we did vastly improve the restrooms.
Because that restroom looked like an alleyway to me. That restroom.
Exactly. Yeah. Can you imagine? I admit that I never used it. I would.
You haven't talked too much about funding and how you are being able to do all of these amazing projects.
Yeah, that's a great question about funding, how we do these projects. So every year, EMI designs and plans about 100 projects all around the world. And so what we provide is all of the planning and design that will make it happen. So we will partner with a ministry that has a tremendous vision to impact their community for Christ and are obviously in an area of need. And so we come alongside them, and we also charge a nominal amount that ministry will value our design. because for decades, EMI gave away all of our designs for free. And we realized that then it wasn't valued. And if they didn't have to pay for it, they'd say, well, let's not do this, let's change this and everything else. and quickly got steered away from really what was a safe and effective design, because they may not have the background of all the understanding that went into that and the rationale. And so, so all of our staff with EMI, we are all self-supporting as missionaries. And so, like Gordon mentioned, we raise our own support so that we don't have to pass those costs on to the ministries that we serve, as they're serving the poorest of the poor. And then the projects, they use our designs and like this and video fly-throughs and everything else to then be able to share that vision with others, including from the community. And so this community, including the mayor and the governor, they are investing in that, but also the missionary in Seattle, they do fundraisers and everything else. And so we're all trying to help out so that this school will be built. Now, because EMI designs 100 projects like this every year, we don't have the capacity to fund that. You know, this project will cost almost $500,000 before it's complete. And then times that by 100, you know, it's beyond our capacity. And so we partner with groups like Samaritan's Purse and local churches, and even USAID has sponsored a few of the projects that we've been able to design. So that was a good question.
$500,000 is the value of the median value of one house. You know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's the dollar can go about 20 times as far in the developing world countries like this than it does here per square foot. So yeah, that $500,000 seems like a lot, but relatively no, quite little. Yeah. Yes.
Randy, I think I want to say in light of my message this morning that it's important to note that Samaritan's Purse is a very evangelical group, but they're certainly doing wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. Samaritan's Purse, it's been a little controversial. Even, you know, they are a fantastic group. I was glad to work with them and see the heart for evangelism. We called this I hesitate because I know this will be online. So that project was very evangelistic. It had the heart to reach that people. And so we even changed the acronym. So it went from evangelism to empowerment so that it could be broadcast publicly. And but yeah, fantastic ministry doing work all over the world. And right now they're in the Ukraine and they're in Poland and they're helping those refugees as first responders. So Samaritan's Purse has often asked us to partner with them as their technical arm to be able to do their projects. So it's been a privilege to work with them. This picture might be more than a year old now, but it's some of the retaining walls that shows you the geography of this project. And the last project I wanted to tell you about, I simply have a video to show in a moment. It's a project that we've done out of our Uganda office. And I like to end with this video today because it is a celebration. You know, we get to go in and we get to design like the Yazidi project. I got to design that, and the grand opening was last month, but I couldn't travel back to Kurdistan last month. So I couldn't be there for the grand opening ceremony, which would have been really special. And this, the Guatemala project is still in construction, and maybe I'll get to go and we'll celebrate there at the grand opening day. But this project in Uganda is called the GEM Foundation. It's a missionary project as well that's serving special needs children who have been abused or orphaned in Uganda. And so EMI has partnered with them over the last 4 to 5 years. And they were also renting facilities that was the home for these special need children. And so EMI did a complete design of a new campus. It's beautiful, and it has a number of different homes for the children to separate the boys and the girls and the different age groups and the different needs that they have, because many of our projects are for special needs, and it really requires a high level of design to be able to give them all of the accessibility measures that are needed for different kinds of disabilities and different age groups. So that's one of the things we really have to take into consideration. So Mike, let's go ahead and show a video of opening day when these 77 children are first able to move into the facilities that EMI has designed.
Here in the GEM Foundation. Bittersweet to be leaving here and knowing that this chapter has closed of being in this home, but it's so exciting as well as we look to the future and what God has for the GEM Foundation and what God has for our kids. It's the long awaited and long hoped for moment. Yeah, it's just exciting. So we can hardly wait. The GEM Village is an answer to prayer.
And it's amazing because we've been dreaming about it for so long.
Close your eyes with me. Start imagining a world full of love. We can change the stars with our hands and hearts. Make them shine on us. But no, don't worry, darling. They won't stop staring, but soon they'll be caring. Come from near and far with their hands and hearts, 'cause it's time to stand up.
And now there's no limit. Our kids are going to be able to go anywhere. They can go and see their friends in the other house. They can wheel down the sidewalk through the village and just have that accessibility that they longed for and that freedom of just being a kid and just getting to grow up and thrive in that village. We're so excited about the future. At the GEM Foundation, we envision a world where no one with special needs is left behind, where every child with special needs is accepted and loved for who they are, uniquely made and chosen by God. So this is just the next step in the GEM Foundation and the next step for the future of creating a world where there's accessibility for our kids and they're loved and accepted for who they are. So we just want to thank you for being a huge part of this moment and for making this a reality. We couldn't have done it without you.
They won't stop staring, but soon they'll be caring. Oh, the world is changing, and I'm saying is we gotta believe. I'm a drop of water, working all together, living ocean deep.
Shriners.
Did spiders ever come into these, in the world?
That's a good question. Personally, I have not had any interaction with Shriners, but they may very well do that. We've worked with a lot of different groups, Doctors Without Borders, and a lot of private hospitals will have sister, hospitals. There's a number of mission hospitals. In fact, in recent years, EMI has designed more medical facilities than almost anything else. And we're almost becoming known for that specific niche as well. But I'm not sure about Shriners. Yeah.
When I think when I look at these children, I think it's Shriners.
Yeah, it's the same group. And, just like we heard about this morning, where we're called to follow Christ. Even up that hill to Calvary, but in Acts, he tells us, go to Jerusalem, where we are here in Spokane or in the Northwest, in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And so certainly it's all of this as we seek to follow Christ and bring him to any sphere of influence, whether it's engineering or medicine or teaching, whatever walk of life that we're in. There are opportunities to love and share. Yeah, any other questions? We've got 5 or 10 minutes left.
We have a sister church in El Salvador. And so I'm just curious as to whether your organization has done any projects I know Guatemala and El Salvador.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything actually in El Salvador.
Yeah, well, in preparation for coming here, I went online and I was telling Barry that I heard him, online a couple of weeks ago, maybe and you were there too. I didn't recognize you. And thank you for sharing about that. That was a wonderful presentation. And so I went online and looked up that church and where it was and to try to see if we'd had any connection there in the past. With that specific church and community, not that I know of. But we've done a number of projects in El Salvador. So we started that office in Guatemala about 20 years ago. And since then we've done, in fact, I just looked up the other day, we have, a total of more than 500 projects throughout Latin America, Mexico through South America. Most of those are in Central America, where we started the office 20 years ago. Since then, our office has moved and it's now in Managua, Nicaragua. And they just got in touch with me and said, hey, Randy, help us to find all of those old connections from 10 to 20 years ago in Guatemala and all the projects that we did, because they need to expand more than wherever we are, we're consumed with the need immediately around us. But they're looking to branch out and go beyond. So we've done dozens of projects in El Salvador. And probably more than 100 in Guatemala and now many in Nicaragua and other places. And in June, I should be going to Bolivia as well and designing a school there. So Barry and
we were just really sensitized, those of us who went down there, the water situation. For a place that's raining constantly, they don't have potable water. And does your organization have self-sustaining water systems and stuff? Not that you put it in, but do you know groups that do that or systems that if we chose to get a water program going for our local community down there, we have resources?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a civil engineer. We've got dozens of civil engineers. We work with hundreds of volunteers who do this. And there's also dozens of models and systems depending on, what the specific needs are and the quantity of water that's needed. And if it's going to go along with a sanitation system and who it's going to be serving. Is it a school? Is it a church? Is it an entire community? And then who is going to run this and what local materials are available so they can keep up on the maintenance, and what what water is available. Do we have to dig for it? Do we have to do rain harvesting? There's so many models. And so we can get involved and assess that situation and say, hey, here's one or two options that we think would really serve this specific situation. Yeah. So Dave?
I was wondering, what your recruitment looks like. Who are you recruiting and what's that like?
Yeah, good question. What does our recruitment look like at EMI? So that's something that I'm really heavily involved with now that I'm living stateside. And for years and years, we run a conference, we speak at universities, churches like this, any opportunities that we can have to connect and get the word out, because we've always been looking for volunteers. And now we have a lot of volunteers and we have tremendous project need from all over the world. In fact, all the more now coming out of COVID. So COVID has wreaked havoc, but even worse than maybe the disease itself has been the isolation and all of the measures that people have taken, that has shut down the economies and tourism and everything else. And so I've been reading that even about a year ago, I read that more than 500 million people have been plunged below the extreme poverty line worldwide. And just in Latin America alone, it's taking it back 20 years of development. And so in terms of economic ability, we are 20 years behind where we were pre-COVID. We've lost tremendous ground. And so the need is devastating. And so what we really recruit for now are staff members. We need more design professionals who can go overseas and live overseas and do this long term. That's our biggest need right now. But of course, we still do 100 trips where we mobilize teams of volunteers. And it's the bulk of the engineering work is done through the volunteers that we manage the projects for. So, yeah, good question. Did you have a question?
One's in orphanage in Guatemala.
Ah, mm-hmm.
I know that they
Yeah.
But that's their heart. And I don't think people realize how many orphan children there are in Guatemala.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are. Yeah. So there's a lot of projects out there, and you've got my information, email, phone number. And so all the time we're finding projects like that as well. But I can guarantee that if you aren't an architect or engineer, you probably know one, even if you don't want to admit it. And so just getting that word out and helping us recruit would be valuable as well. But I would love to hear about that or make the connection for us. So, Gordon.
Yeah. Do you ever run into problems with local government or national government? Mountable, and you have to abandon a project because of either demands of bribery or bureaucratic red tape that you can't cut through.
Yeah. So the question is, ever encounter issues with corruption, government bureaucracy, red tape that just shuts down a project? And the answer is yes, unfortunately. So EMI, to my knowledge, we have never worked directly with a government on a project because corruption is, I think, our #1 problem that we encounter. So the poverty is devastating, finding funds is challenging, working in a third world environment, cross-cultural language, lack of material, and all of these are challenges, but corruption is the #1 challenge that we face across the board. And that's helped tremendously because as a foreigner walking overseas, immediately people will see an opportunity to take advantage. And so we have to be very careful. That's why it's one of the reasons why we partner with locals on the development of each and every project. In fact, we don't do a project unless we have 2 local engineers or architects that we're working with, and then they do the interface to get the projects permitted and moving ahead with government and everything else. And so that's an essential part that's really helping now our projects move ahead. But I know in the past that there have been projects that have been shut down. I know that we've gone in, there's all sorts of land issues, bureaucracy that takes place, and land ownership. In the developing world, there's a big system of leasing land for 99 years or something like that, where the government still has a tie and connections to. But whenever we can avoid working with governments, we avoid that. Yeah. Did you have a question?
I was just curious about your recruitment. Are you here to recruit in Spokane?
Well,
This week?
yeah, every opportunity. So Diane's asking about recruiting, and if this trip to Spokane is specifically to recruit. Yes, it really is. This trip to Spokane, Gordon and Sue invited me to speak here. And so every opportunity I have to speak, I want to share the vision of EMI, the needs that there are, however that connects with what God is doing in your heart to be able to get involved. EMI, we always say, we say, go, give, pray. So those who can go, come with us, join us in this mission. If you can't go, you can give. And if you can't give, pray for the work that we are doing. And so all of us have a role in this missions overall, and what God is doing around the world, but specifically here today at EMI. So I'm always recruiting. Sometimes I do. Yeah, not this specific trip. Yeah, but yes, I have in the past. I've spoken at Whitworth before. I connected with their engineering program. And that's my alma mater. And so there's a lot of connection there as well. And every year I'll speak at a few universities. Yeah, I've never connected yet with Gonzaga and should do that. Yeah.
How long are you stateside?
Well, so I've been with EMI now 21, going on 21 years. I was overseas for 15 of those years, and now I live in Washington. So I came back about 7 years ago, and most of my family was here because I grew up in Spokane. So these are my roots, and I only have one aunt left in Spokane itself. So we spent the night with her last night, and so that's always good to come back and see her. But even though I'm based here now, and we have a U.S. office, which is in Colorado Springs, I'll still travel, as often as needed. So that's why in June, I'll probably be going to Bolivia to design a school project there. Yeah.
There's a question from Don, and let's make that our last question.
Well, I'm just wondering where you live. You said in the state of Washington, and then you mentioned that church that was involved from Seattle. I wondered if you were involved with that church.
Yeah, that's coincidental. So my wife and I were raising 6 kids together. We live in Ellensburg, Washington. And so most of my immediate family, my sister's there. I've got other family on the west side. My parents are in Tacoma. The Seattle connection to the Guatemala project was purely coincidental, but that facilitated a number of personal meetings that I could have with the ministry leaders that were here stateside before I led the team to go to Guatemala together with them. So that was a fortunate, close connection. Yeah. Well, thank you.
We should bring things to a close and honor the time, but I know Randy will be happy to talk more if any of you want to pursue a conversation with him. Please join me in thanking him and thanking me for being here today.
Thank you.